Welcome to the In the Silence podcast. I'm your host, Sandra Payne. As an RN and holistic wellness coach working with nurses, I am uniquely positioned to hear the struggles, the deep passions, and the stories of nurses, our silent heroes. Many nurses suffer with burnout, depression, anxiety, PTSD, substance abuse, and suicidality, and they do so in silence. Nurses are the ones we turn to for help when we need it the most, and this is a heavy burden for them to carry. This burden, the pervasive bullying and unsupportive culture of our healthcare system, means many nurses have lost their voice. These are their stories. My guest today is Katrina Stephenson, an RN currently living in Alberta, Canada. Katrina's focus in her nursing career has been primarily working within a harm reduction model of care with individuals challenged by concurrent disorders and histories of trauma. In addition to caring for her patients' traumas, Katrina has had her own lived experience with her work-related PTSD and mood-associated disorders. Katrina has seen that in order to provide the safe and holistic nursing care our patients need, that she and her colleagues need adequate support on the job to prevent mental and emotional challenges, stress, and trauma-related injuries. She is an advocate for trauma-informed support from all levels of regulation and management in order to provide a system that provides psychologically and physically safe workplaces for all healthcare providers. As a harm reduction nurse, Katrina believes it is essential for us to understand and care for people with mental health and substance use challenges in such a way that reduces stigma and discrimination, and that allows us the opportunity to share our stories, as it is such a powerful way to change the negative climate surrounding these common struggles. To support this quest, Katrina and a few nursing peers recently founded the Trauma-Informed, Non-Judgmental Nurse-to-Nurse Peer Support Group. This is for nurses to prevent, mitigate, and support other nurses with mental health injuries, occupational stress injuries, and so much more. I'm thrilled to have Katrina here with me today to share with us some of her intimate and personal journey through her own mental health injury and her shared passion for holistic healing with a trauma-informed integrative approach. Welcome to the show, Katrina.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and for your courage and for everything that you're doing for nurses. I really would like to start by giving you an opportunity to share with us a little bit of your story as a nurse, as a woman, I know as a mother. So you can just tell us as much or as little as you feel you'd like to share with us about you.
Okay, sure. Thanks again for having me here. I started my nursing later in life. I was 28. So before that, I lived some other lives and different jobs. I was a makeup artist and an esthetician. So, I was doing pedicures and all those good things. I also did some landscaping, worked in a call center. Before that, worked at a gas station, was a nanny in California. So I did a lot of different things, lived some other, parts of my life up till I was about 28. At that time, I was living in Edmonton and I decided I had family in Ontario and there was a distance education program. It was the registered practical nursing. And it was from a distance campus in Dryden, Ontario. I moved there and I took my registered practical nursing. It was like a fast track 2-year program. After that, I moved to Vancouver because before I had left Edmonton, where I was living, I had met my now husband. And at that point, he was in Vancouver. So I made my way across the country to the West Coast and I started my nursing there. Right away, I found that the full scope licensed practical nursing that I had taken in Ontario wasn't really matching what was going on in BC. So I wasn't working up to my scope. So it pushed me right back into school and I started a bridging program through Langara College. In my nursing itself, I found that I was always gravitating to anyone that was kind of sitting in the margins of society and being pushed aside or being judged. And that was always the people I gravitated to. So folks that had mental health challenges or substance use disorders, that was something that always brought me to that kind of care. I finished my degree and we lived in Vancouver for another 8 years. And then I didn't decide, my husband decided after our first child that he was going to become a firefighter. He was at UBC History Honors. And then that's what brought us to Edmonton is he became a firefighter and made it all the way through in the crew here. So I guess reasons why I became a nurse was, I think when I was young, I was always looking after animals, always caring for things, saving the mice from the cats, always trying to nurse them back, or the kitties that didn't, that weren't very well. And I was always nursing things. So it was kind of in my nature. I know that I got a letter from my teacher, my grade school teacher, not that long ago. And his name was Mr. Smart, which is funny, a great name. And he had said, in that, it was like, what do you want to do when you're older? And in there, it said nurse. So I thought that was funny because I didn't remember writing that. So I would have been in like around grade 4, grade 5 or something like that. I have lots of family members that are nurses. One pivotal person was my grandma, some aunts that are very close to me. So, there was some major influences there. Though being the person I am, I'm a little bit of a rebel and I have to do things in my own time. So it wasn't until I was 28, like I said, I became a nurse. So yeah, that's kind of what brought me to nursing. Yeah.
And so you started off in Vancouver and then you made your way back to Alberta about 8 years later. And what kind of, like, I know you say you were drawn to those kinds of patients with those, some sort of marginalized patients, but they exist in every aspect of nursing. So where were some of your experience tied into? Like, where were some of the places you worked?
I did, as an LPN, I was in the emergency first aid rapid access at Lionsgate Hospital. And I floated through the hospital at first, and then I was gravitating down to the emergency room. So I did get a part-time there. When I was doing my degree, I had a rotation on an assertive community treatment team in community. So working with people with severe and persistent mental health disorders. And a lot of time, they have the concurrent substance use disorder, treating. But at that time I asked them if they would be interested in employing me as a student nurse. And they did. They ended up, after my rotation. So I did start working on that team that we'd go down into the downtown east side in Vancouver and into hotels and meet people where they were at. So a lot of the harm reduction philosophy of care was coming in there. One of the rotations I did on the HIV unit at St. Paul's Hospital, and it was just my favorite. The harm reduction model just really sits so well with me. You're not judging people. You're meeting them where they're at. You're letting them come to a place on their own time. You can't force people to, we know that in healthcare anyways, but it's very effective model of care. And I've seen people find their way back. That brought me, after graduating, to that team. They hired me, but it was around the time of the Olympics. So there wasn't a lot of work. I was asking for more hours. And then the operation leader said, well, there's actually a clinic in the downtown east side called the Providence Crosstown Clinic. The nurse there is doing the nurse work and the supervision work, like clinical supervisor. And so I went down there and I again pushed for a position because they didn't have a clinic nurse educator like they did in the immune deficiency clinic at St. Paul's. So I became the clinic nurse educator there. And later on, it became part of the Salome trial, so the study to assess long-term opiate maintenance effectiveness. So IOTs to see if the injectable, if it be an opiate of some kind, either heroin or Dilaudid. And there was, 2-phase trial. And then my husband brought me to Edmonton in the midst of that trial. So I actually had a phone interview and was hired through another assertive community treatment here in Edmonton. So I continued to work within a harm reduction model of care with folks with mental health disorders and doing outreach nursing kind of on the street and, again, meeting people where they were at. A little bit later on, I did a little bit more STI nursing care. And I worked within the inner city with homeless folks, and most recently opened up the first supervised consumption service in Edmonton. Yeah, and then I kind of stepped away from that and did a little bit of home care. And now I am just on my way returning back to work after recovering from work-related occupational stress injuries. So that's kind of where I'm at with my career at this point.
Yeah. Wow. What a powerful history though. Really, like lots of really amazing projects that you've been a part of. But I know that in the last while, you've had your own struggles that were actually, I feel like there's a tie between what you have practiced and what you have learned to, or become to learn, is like a really effective model. And, recognizing the stigma around these marginalized people and substance abuse and mental illness, and then leading into your own injury at work. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. In 2000 Sandra, you and I talked about this just before we came on, but like the fear to talk about this. I've always been someone that's very open to speaking about this because, speaking about mental illness and, challenges around it really does decrease the stigma when we're aware and we have an understanding of where people are at, right? Mm-hmm. I came to this injury around 2017. I know that it was there was things happening before, but like there was one trigger point. Like a lot of this was cumulative over the years, losing patients to overdoses. Nurses, we see so much, right? And if we're not given and allowed the time to process it, which a lot of the time we're not, we just have to keep going. It adds up. That trauma gets trapped in our body, and mine added up. I thought I was doing a good job looking after myself. I was advocating for support, to ask for supports. I was advocating for us, my team, myself, to have time to really go through and debrief after someone had died of suicide, someone we'd known, those kind of events. But there was this one particular event, and it was fairly violent in a sense, and it was one of my clients. And I do talk about this in the article I wrote for UNA.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, that was my trigger. And, I had few sleepless nights. Work was keeping me up, thinking about work way too much. It was interfering with my family life. I could tell it was. But once this one event happened, I was thrown into the midst of PTSD. I was hypervigilant. I was having panic attacks when I'd never had panic attacks in my life before. And I knew this was happening. I could see it all. I was a mental health nurse. I started speaking about it. I remember talking to one of my colleagues, lovely colleagues, in the med room one day. We were going to go out for an outreach and go take some meds to some patients. And I said to him, I'm like, this is crap. I'm having panic attacks. Like, this is a symptom of this job. This can't keep happening. We had a really nice conversation, and he said, thank you, Katrina, for talking about it. Like, we work in mental health and we don't even talk about this. We're scared to talk about it because we're going to be judged. Mm-hmm. I was open. I brought it up in a case conference that weekend after I had that panic attack. I'm like, I'm sleeping with a bat by my bed. I think people, like the people I felt really safe with, I would tell them, I think people are out to get me. I'm paranoid. I'm literally paranoid. I'm checking the door 20 times at night, both doors, to make sure they're locked. I'm looking out the window to see that there's no one there. And I'm not sleeping. I'm not eating. I'm losing all this weight. I can't focus. My memory is awful. And then I started seeing it interfering with my client care. I had patients saying, are you okay? They were asking me if I was okay, because I had relationships with people, like I'm case managing their lives with them, right? So that being reflected back to me from my family and my patients and my colleagues was like, it was helpful, right? It was supportive. I did get help. The funny thing was I didn't stop working. I took one day off, 1 day. And, retrospectively, I would have done it differently. I did see a psychologist who was quite trauma informed. That was my first question. Do you know about trauma? Do you know how nurses work?
Yeah.
I knew what I needed, which was my strength in that moment. Like, those were the positives with having this injury and working mental health. I knew where I needed to go and what I needed to get well. I have figured out a lot more since, but I've found that EMDR is a powerful tool for trauma that's trapped in your body. So, I kept working. I shared with people that I shouldn't have shared with. I dealt with discrimination from a manager when I went to apply for a job because I had told that person that I had PTSD and I was healing from it. And I was discriminated against in an interview. I kept working and I ended up, dealing with bullying, and I'd get a little bit better. And then I'd, have more events that would happen at work, and it would, re-injure me essentially. So this went on until 2019. And then, I was really dealing with PTSD with anxiety associated traits. And then it went deeper and darker into depression. I really really have a newfound appreciation for all of these mental health disorders. So yeah, that's kind of what the last injury has taken me off work for 2 years. I was every day thinking of suicide, every day trying to not be irritated with my children, dealing with the guilt and the shame of all of that, right? And putting a lot on myself, especially when I was depressed. The anxiety was almost a little easier to deal with. When the depression came in, it was super hard to get any kind of enjoyment at all. There was a lot of apathy, you know? So I have worked my way from a very dark place. And, you know, at that time, I really didn't want to go back to nursing at all. And I love nursing. I love it. I love the people. I love the job, you know, minus all the, you know, systemic issues. So that's where I found myself. I've navigated the system for folks that were stigmatized against, who had mental illness in systems that are not trauma informed. They don't understand mental illness. You had to advocate for the appropriate care and supports for them. And I had to do the same for myself.
Yeah.
WCB, because of employers denying my claims, I've had to go through appeals. Luckily, you know, another insurance wage loss company with Canada Life, I was able to get supports that way financially, thank God, because financial stress is one of the worst, right? So, you know, those things were positive because I worked in psychiatry and I had some really positive workmates. You know, I emailed a psychiatrist I knew, and I had found out after the fact that he was doing transcranial magnetic stimulation. So, you know, that treatment in itself kicked me out of depression in 30 days. I went from 32 on the Beck's depression scale to 1. But because of the trauma that was still trapped in my body, you know, I relapsed.
Yeah.
You know, so I found out, you know, there's these other ways of caring for this. It's brought nurse to nurse peer support is why I'm like so passionate about having supports for nurses. And I did mention my husband's a firefighter, and I've worked in community with emergency services. So I know they have peer support. You know, police have peer support. Firefighters have peer support. EMS, you know, there's a lot of women in EMS as well, but EMS, they have peer support here in the city. And, you know, I've seen it in action.
Like there's so much there. There's like, you know, I'm just so intently listening to your story, as I'm sure everyone is. And I just, you know, first of all, I do want to acknowledge the courage it takes to tell your story, a painful story of mental illness, mental disorder, mental challenges, whatever you want to call it. Like when we're struggling, when we're struggling with anything but a physical illness, there is a significant stigma. And I believe it's a big part of the problem in what I am definitely referring to as a mental health crisis in nursing that we're facing right now. And, you know, the fact that there is so many of us struggling, but yet so few of us reaching out for help because of this stigma. It just, it takes so much courage to speak our truth and to tell our story. So I really want to honor you for that first and foremost. There's so many pieces in there that you mentioned, like how you didn't take any time off, which I think is also tied to this toxic culture we work in where, you know, it's not looked at as a strength to say, I'm struggling and I need time. I need time to heal and to work through this. Instead, it's like power through, soldier on, right? Like there just isn't that space and that grace. And we've so lost that human element that, you know, that we need. And it's interesting to me that, you know, listening to you, how you noticed it impacting your life and your family life and how you were managing things. But then the kicker, like the tipping point, was your patients. And I think that just speaks so loudly to how dedicated we are in this job, in this profession, right? Like our patients are everything. This is why we endure everything that we do, is for them, to help them in the best way we can. And when you're reflected back from someone in that kind of relationship, a patient-nurse relationship, they're looking at you like, are you okay? I can just, you know, when you were saying that, I could just imagine what that must have felt like, because I've heard so many other nurses share too. Like it's, you know, it was my husband who said, I think you need help. Or it was, you know, my parents who said, I think you need to talk to somebody, or a colleague, right? So it's like when someone else sees it, it almost validates it. And so I do think it's tied to us telling our story, because if you're sharing your story, it's like you are almost giving somebody else permission to share their story and to speak up and to know that what they're feeling is not abnormal, like that it's not some kind of personal failing. It's something that, well, that there's hope for, because I mean, you're sharing your story of coming from that very dark place, full, I'm sure, of guilt and shame and sadness and grief and anger. And you've pulled yourself out. And this is a lifelong journey. And I mean, I've dealt with mental illness since I was in my teens. So I definitely know the longevity of the journey. What kept you there? Like, what kept you coming back to the job? What kept you working as a nurse, even though you were struggling and you were so aware of how this was affecting your personal life? What kept you coming back?
It's exactly what you said, Sandra. It was despite the work, the, violence we see, the trauma we see, being so short-staffed, not having the time to care for our patients the way we want to, the bullying, everything that we see and we experience. It was kept the patients. The patients are they are the reason I kept going back. There was more than one patient that said that to me, because the work I do, you get to know each other, like years of case management with folks. They know, they see. It's like when you've experienced mental health, you see it in others. They had experienced mental health challenges. They saw it in me. They wouldn't say that. Just, are you okay? Like, just, we're all human and we feel each other. We're empathetic people. And there just came a point where it was like, no, I can't be effective in my job if I'm not well. Like, I knew there was a point where it was like, no, I can't. I have to step away. That was the hardest part, though, the guilt to step away. It's really tied into the mental health piece as well, but it's like so important around our self-care and to be well in our jobs. It's so necessary. But like each day, like even my husband, he did say, you got to get out of this work. There's not enough supports in there for you. You got to get out of this work. I just kept going back. But each day my voice got less and less, and I could feel my power within me, because I'm quite a vocal person. I come from a place of kindness and rationale, and using that nursing rationale, and this is how we need to do this care. Any other way is not ethical, or whatever it might have been. But my voice, I was starting to lose my voice, and that's when I really knew I had to step back.
You've come such a long way, and I know you shared a little bit about some of the things that you've went through, the people you've worked with, and the tools that you used, and the different modalities, I guess we can call them, of treatment. And I'm curious now, when you look back, if you could go back to that young student nurse who is just starting out, even though you say later in life, 28 still pretty young. So yes. what would you say to her? Like, what kind of advice would you give to her, knowing what you know now, knowing what you've been through?
I'd say, Katrina, maybe you should have stepped away a little before you got really injured. That, that's not that old of a saying, but it's like, put on your oxygen mask first before you go and look after others. I think that is one thing that was totally highlighted for me through all this journey, is really, I wasn't doing that self-care piece, even though, like, I do remember being taught around, stress of the job. And I don't really remember them talking about burnout or compassion fatigue or anything, but I remember a class on, the stressors in life. But I would say, it's okay to walk away when you need to. It's okay to try a different type of nursing if it gets to be too much. You can only do so much as one person, right? And it's okay to look after yourself.
Yeah, it's okay, and it's necessary, really. Yeah. Like, if not the most necessary fundamental piece of being a human being is looking after ourselves. But it's so interesting to me how that's downplayed. Maybe not even downplayed, but it's just not emphasized enough.
Or if it is emphasized, Sandra, it's almost like we're guilted into feeling like we didn't do enough for ourselves. We reflect so much as nurses. It's like, well, what did I do wrong? Right. Yeah. And it's like, well, I tried to look after myself in this environment. Sometimes it's just not possible. Sometimes you just need to walk away. Yeah. And that is in itself caring for yourself, as hard as it may be, right?
I was going to say there's, I can recall a number of nurses sharing with me that I thought I was looking after myself. I was doing things that they thought were self-care. And it's not that they weren't, but then you come to this place where like, you're still struggling. So like, what's wrong with me? Like, why is what I'm doing not enough? And like, I think you're right. Sometimes you need to stop breathing in the toxic air so that you can actually detoxify, right? If we're struggling, we're continuing to put ourselves in the same positions. Over time, the expectation or the amount of stress, it far outweighs the pieces of self-care that we're doing. So it's just not sustainable long term. I feel like one of the biggest gifts of the nursing profession is that there is so many options. Like we can leave, we can find something else. You shared a little bit about the discrimination that you experienced when you did try to find a new job. And that is something I've also heard from nurses. Do you have anything you want to comment on that or anything further to share about that?
Yeah. Working in different healthcare from Ontario to BC to Alberta, I've worked in 3 different provinces. So I've seen how violence in the workplace is dealt with differently. And that discrimination is bullying. It was awful. But I really, really think that what we need to do in these workplaces is have posters up around bullying and that it's not acceptable. I don't see enough visual awareness around it. There's nothing they're starting to have more like within orientation, a module. But like, I wonder, what managers get, because I see so much top heavy bullying happening, right? So it's just like, what are we doing in our workplaces to keep us safe? Like, what kind of psychological safety do we have in our workplaces? There's not enough. There isn't enough. Like, it's not a common conversation. I remember that happening and I put up posters about bullying. I went on to our health authority website and I put them up. And they were down in a few days. Those kind of behaviors happening in the workplace are just unacceptable.
Yeah.
I actually really loved the work there, but I didn't go back. And I could have stayed in that work, but I wasn't supported.
Yeah.
And that was after I had gone to that person to say there was another bullying incident happening. And I was just trying to be open about what was happening for me to get the supports I needed.
It's such the unfortunate thing is we want to speak up. We need to speak up. Because otherwise it just, if you think of any kind of abuse, which is, this is a form of abuse. And if we don't speak up, then we just become the victim and we become small. We lose sight of ourselves. We lose sight of who we are. Then the bully or the abuser wins. And it's crazy to even, it's just crazy to know that this is such a problem in the profession that's known across the world as a caring profession, right? As nurses are the ones who you look to for caring, for empathy, to listen to you. And yet this is one of the most common pervasive problems in healthcare. And I think like of posts and things like that I've read about this and the public being shocked that this is a thing, and I just, because we don't talk about it. And if we do talk about it, we're often shut down. Our voices don't want, and I say they as like this global they, because I'm not sure who it is, but they definitely don't want this to be out there. And it's not that, I feel like we're not shaming the profession, but it might maybe come across that way. But the fact is that this has been a problem for a long time. And we're clearly not doing enough about it if it's still this big of an issue, right? We have to talk about it. We have to bring it to the light so that we can come up with some real true strategies to fix it. But I also think us sharing our stories and being vocal about it is a big part of the picture, because if we're allowing ourselves to be small and to hide our truth, then they're winning. The bully is winning. Yeah. So whoever the bully is, they're winning at that point.
I always try to turn this around, Sandra, and it's not, and I don't want it to seem like it's like I'm, I try to bring empathy to the bully as well. Like, why are they bullying? Really, it's not my job to do that, but it also kind of makes you think like what's happening in these workplace cultures that someone feels like that this is okay. How stressed out are they that they react in these behaviors? This mental health, my mental health nursing, it's kicking in, but it also is like, I'm not saying that behavior is okay.
There's a reason. Yeah. And it is, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
We say like abused people abuse people. So something is creating enough distress in them that they are lashing out in this way to try to, in some way, fill a need of their own. There's an amazing group out of UBC. They're doing a project on bullying in nursing school. They did this graphic novel, and I'll be sure to post the link in the show notes for anybody who wants to check it out. But this graphic novel really helped to show the different sides of the bully and the bullied. And when I was in nursing school, I was bullied. And this project really helped me to shift my perspective to see, how that other person might have been feeling. Because when you're in it, like when you're being bullied in that moment, it is really hard to have compassion and empathy for someone who's making you feel so small and useless and so many other words. But when you can kind of step outside of it and see this different perspective that person is actually really struggling in their own way, it just, again, it creates a little bit more of that human connection. And you're right, it doesn't excuse what they're doing, but it also takes a little bit of it off of us, of feeling like there's something wrong with me. That this is something that I've done to create this kind of relationship. I mean, this is such an important conversation to have. So I want you to tell me, we'll just kind of shift gears here a little bit, and you can tell me, because I know you've shared a little bit about the things that you've gone through in your own healing journey since the initial kind of awareness of your injury. So I'm curious if you could tell us, like, what's been the most helpful support or the most profound healing tools that you've found to deal with stress and the overwhelm and the anxiety and the depression and everything else in between that's gone on?
I think there's so many things, there's so many pieces to that puzzle, right? For me, it was the awareness that was happening, telling myself that it was okay. I don't really like this saying, but I kind of like it. It's okay to not be okay. Reach out to your support system. I am so blessed, so lucky. I think of my clients, and then I think of the supports I have, and I'm just so lucky. I had a friend that said, "You're not showing up at, our girl things anymore. Like, what's happening?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, is there something going on? And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm depressed." Just having those people around that you can trust, that you can open up to. I have a metaphor. I use it with my kids, but I used to use it in my nursing as well, is like that mental pain, that emotional pain is like a sliver, right, in our body. And if we let that sliver stay in our body, it starts to fester, and it can go systemic. So that's when we start to see those physical things happening to us. So it's like reaching out and understanding all those kind of things. And for me, it was getting to see the psychiatrist that actually diagnosed me with PTSD. That was validating. It was scary as hell, but it was validating. I was like, okay, I'm not losing my mind. I'm actually got PTSD. Yeah. I was like, okay, good. That's okay.
Funny how that's like a good thing, right? To have an answer though is so validating. It's like, okay, yeah.
Because I'm an open person, even though it's scary as a nurse to be open like this, and I can even right now, I'm a little triggered. I can tell it's scary for me. It was reaching out to other peers. I wrote that article for UNA was so healing for me. It was like, yes, I had this happen to me and I'm okay. Any judgments that I may have had for myself, I was just kind of letting go. I don't recommend that everyone does that. For me, that's what worked. My bigger goal was to find healing for other nurses as well, like to be open so that they could also find their healing, and that people didn't feel alone when I felt so alone. Yeah. When I reached out to others and started talking, that's when I started to really see some healing, not only in myself, but like my relationships with my husband, my children, everything. So, everything that was harmed by this workplace injury was starting to heal when I was starting to reach out and talk and exercise. I took a mindfulness-based stress reduction course. I love mindfulness. It's just like my newfound appreciation. I love the science behind it because, as a nurse, we need our science.
Yeah.
I just think it's such a beautiful thing. Like I said, the transcranial magnetic stimulation also works with neuroplasticity. And so I really found that fascinating, as well as healing in itself. Finding a therapist that was trauma informed, that knew the work we did, because it can be exhausting to have to tell someone all the stories. And I've had it where I'm almost feel like I'm traumatizing the therapist because they're like, oh my gosh, you had to do that in your work. You did that? Yes, that's what I did. And, so it was like really finding someone that understood the work that I did and feeling safe and finding my safety and getting out in nature is huge for me as well, is what I really found. And then, bringing this peer-to-peer, nurse-to-nurse peer support together, it's empowered me. I have found so much healing in it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's connecting with this sort of purpose, right? Like this sense of something bigger and taking from your pain to create something that can help others. I think that's how some of the greatest healers are born in our world, from their own painful journeys. And, what I'm hearing from you is, as well as these tools and like things that were helpful, like the mindfulness and nature, but it's also this self-acceptance, like kind of owning our pain and saying, that this is a part of my story instead of trying to hide from it, but also the support and connection. And I know I said this at the beginning when we were chatting, but like, I truly believe connection is at the heart of the healing that we need as a human species. So I'd like you to share a little bit about this program that you have founded, because it sounds amazing. And I know I've connected with you already about it.
Like I had said, Sandra, and I think I shared the article with you, is I had written that article, and within the article, it was my way of advocating for change and saying that we had to stop being silent about what was happening to us nurses, that it was like, enough is enough. It was like a call to action to say, hey, we can do something. Let's get something going. I did mention how peer support is evidence-based, and that I've seen it, like I said, with my husband, who's had critical incidents at work, and, the peer team has come in, and I've seen an acute stress reaction with him, and I've seen him come out of it, right? I believe it's because of the peer support model. So I had written that article saying, hey, we're not alone. And after that article was written, and I think Sarah talked about this in your very first podcast, because she is one of the nurses that's coming along on this journey. And there's many. I'm getting all excited. She had reached out to me saying, this is exactly what's happening to me. Like, thank you for talking about it. I had many nurses reach out. Thank you. I thought I was the only one, and it's so scary. And we're just reading this is just it's validating that sense of connectedness. Exactly what you said, Sandra. It's just it's a grassroots initiative that just kind of grown. It's almost surreal to me that it's happening, because I was like, this needs to happen. This needs to happen. I've been like telling people this. I was advocating for this on when my first injury happened. I've been working since 2017 to get this working. And it wasn't until after my injury, but I have all this newfound knowledge. So it's grown into, a nonprofit organization that we want to do a lot of things, but what was first evident is that we need to come together and meet and talk and connect, like you said, and find some hope that you can heal. One of the nurses that reached out to me, and, she said to me, if I hadn't talked to you, I would have never known that I could have healed. Because of you, I have hope. And that to me was so sad, that she was out there with this feeling empty and hopeless. We know that nurses die of suicide. So I don't want anyone else to die and feel hopeless and to feel alone. Like I felt like that. And it is awful. I've never felt something so bad in my life. And I want nurses to find themselves again and to find a place that they feel safe, because it can be really scary. You feel like you're going to lose your license. You feel like you're going to lose your whole livelihood. It can be a really scary place. So my hope is that nurse-to-nurse peer support can be a place that we can find some wellness and heal.
And I so stand with you and your team in this mission of creating these support networks for nurses so that they can come together in a peer support way. I have watched my groups, my coaching groups unfold together into the most magical. It truly brings emotion right to the surface to even think about them. But every week I get to witness them. And I feel, just so deeply honored and grateful for them. And I believe so deeply that the more of us who step up, who are ready to take an honest look at ourselves, at our life, and start to create some change so that we can live our life whole and, full of passion and purpose and joy. And I'm not necessarily saying to leave nursing whatsoever. Like that's never even something that I cross unless you want to, of course, but we need nurses, but we need nurses to be healthy. And so it's like when they come together and they, like you said, when you were looking for a counselor or a psychiatrist, do you know what nurses do? Because I don't want to have to explain to you what we go through. And every single person tells me that. They're like, it's so nice that you're a nurse because you get it. And they're sitting around in these online platforms with other nurses who are sharing their own stories. And there is this deep connection that forms. And I truly, when I talk about my program, I'm like, yes, you get me as your coach and all the training and everything that I have done, but the group provides something that I cannot provide. The group does something completely magical. It really is, that creates this sense of strength and possibility. And that word you said, hope, it creates hope. And I so stand with you in not wanting any, not just nurses. I don't want anybody out there to be walking around in these dark pits of despair, thinking that there's no hope and thinking about ending their life, because that pains me so deeply inside, having been through that myself as well. So I just, this initiative you have going is powerful, and I'll be sure to share both your article and a link for people to join the Nurse to Nurse Peer Support Program. I just would like to open it up to you if there's anything else you would like to share with the listeners, anything at all.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I just think that nurses have a lot more positive power than we give ourselves credit for. And, advocacy is one part of that. And I think what you're doing, Sandra, and allowing us a safe space to share what we feel is safe for us is powerful. We need to, as nurses, come together and, if it's in awareness campaigns, podcasts, education, we need to educate people on what is trauma, how to be trauma informed, what does a nurse need to prevent these injuries in the first place. Like a solid look at these workplaces. I don't know of any workplace that's doing any kind of psychological safety assessment after, they lose all their staff members, right? Like, is that happening in the workplaces, We need to prevent these occupational stress injuries in the first place. What is happening? So nurses, we can voice this. We can voice that this needs to happen for us. We need to continue doing the work that we love to do and not be injured in doing it. That is our right. We need our employers, like I said, unions, the government, regulatory bodies. It costs a lot to have a nurse off injured. I didn't ask for this, but it costs a lot. Right? So let's keep our workforce well. Let's look after them because they're so valuable.
Doesn't this just speak to our whole system? Prevention, we know prevention is the key, right? If we can prevent things, we can save so much time, energy, money, and suffering. It needs to take a preventative approach. I think if we had a big conversation with nurses from all over to share what that looks like, what they need to keep themselves healthy and safe. The thing is, though, also, I don't think it's that we don't know what we need. I don't think it's that our employers don't know what we need, or that the unions or that the regulatory bodies don't know. It's like this scrambling, everybody is just barely keeping their head above water. Like, it's not just the nurses on the floor. It is like the unions. I mean, I have clients and I have spoken with nurses who are on the unions. They're barely keeping their heads above water too. So, I mean, it's at every level that the resources are not enough to sustain the work that we're having to do. So, I mean, there's such a massive change throughout every tier of the system that needs to happen. And that alone is like significantly overwhelming to think of, right? So I just go back to, you know, and I'll share this with you because you're doing similar work. Honestly, I feel like it's for all of us, for all the nurses I work with, or for anyone that's doing their own thing, to step up for themselves and to really show up for themselves in a different way. Because when we do the work on an individual basis, it has a ripple effect. It spreads out to the people around us, to our workplaces, to our families. So, you know, I think of myself out there, and this is something my coach told me. She was like, Sandra, you're just out there with your squirt bottle, just one nurse at a time. And then when after you give her own squirt bottle, and she goes out there into the world, and she's, you know, so it's like this massive ripple that will happen if we focus at the individual level, because those systemic things, they are massive. And I don't know, I don't personally feel equipped to navigate them or to even offer suggestions that will have a profound impact, because the problem is so massive. And so I just, you know, when I feel overwhelmed anyways, and I'm sharing this with you because as you're doing this work, it can be overwhelming. In my mind, I just scale back. I just scale back to what is my mission? What is my purpose? And it really is to impact the individual. For each individual nurse that I encounter and speak with and have an opportunity to influence, my mission is to tell them, you are important. You are worth doing everything that you need to do to make your life and yourself healthy. And no matter what that looks like, no matter what, that has to be the number one thing that we're looking at creating a change for, is that we are putting ourselves on the priority list, and that we're not willing to sacrifice any bit of ourselves for any kind of job, for any amount of money, because this is our life. Like, this is our one opportunity in this vessel of a body we got, in this spin, in this life. This is our chance, right? And I mean, I can get really amped up about this because it cracks my heart wide open, because I see so many people struggling, and it gets me really, really fired up. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome. Anytime, Sandra. I was just thinking as you're saying that, this is the one body we have to look after. I tell my kids the same thing. I'm going to take my own advice and your advice. It's just remembering how important we are. Self-compassion.
Well, I thank you so much, Katrina, for being here and for sharing your story and all of your incredible journey and everything that you're doing for nurses at this stage of your journey. And so I really I'm so grateful for you being here and for your honesty and your courage. And I know everyone listening is feeling the same.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra.
I personally want to thank you for taking your time to listen to this podcast. It is my truest honor to sit with these nurses and witness them tell parts of their story. We as human beings have a deep need to be seen and heard, and this is my way of helping nurses in particular find their voice. Please know that the opinions shared in this podcast are those of the individuals sharing them and not a reflection of any employer or regulatory body. We are sharing our truth, and that may not always resonate with you. But I'm guessing if you're listening, that something has rung true for you in this podcast. Our stories offer healing and create connection, two things that we as nurses need as we navigate the jungle of a healthcare career. So thank you for being witness. And if you feel inclined to reach out to the guest on today's episode to offer validation and appreciation, you can always find their contact in the show notes, as well as other links to the offerings of Sandra Payne Wellness. If you'd like to be a part of the community, join our private Facebook group, Surviving Nursing. And if you'd like to share your story on the End the Silence podcast, be sure to reach out. When we can come out of the shadows and into our light, we can create the change that is needed. And when we do this work together, we are so much stronger. Thank you for listening.